Hello and welcome back to another episode of the ShefF1 podcast. It's the first time in quite some time I am joined in the flesh by Seb Olsen and Amy Hammerslog. We're back, all three of us, in the studio together after sort of a prolonged Easter break, but there's been a nice sort of churn out of content in the meantime, and it's quite fitting because we've got the first Chinese Grand Prix back on the F1 calendar for the first time in about 5 years. The last race was back in 2019, F1's 1000th ever race, and then obviously, you know, that thing called coronavirus happened, and of course we've not had China on the grid in the meantime, but yeah, nice to have China back. First sprint race of the season as well, so we've got a lot to look forward to, a lot to delve into for a bit of Chinese Grand Prix preview and predictions. So I can imagine a lot of people watching this episode or listening to this episode might not have actually seen a Shanghai Grand Prix race, simply because it just isn't used very much in the wider world of motorsport, and of course we've not had it in the F1 calendar for quite some time now, if that wasn't clear already. But yeah, so basically about the circuit, it's quite a unique one. Seb, you sort of you gave us an interesting fact before we went live on air about the sort of the design of the circuit. I hadn't heard of this before, but yeah.
Yeah, so it's designed to look like the Chinese symbol for Shang, which means upwards. So yeah, and I think that's because of the obviously the famous corners, which are like designed to be like really long. You got that turn 1, turn 2, and turn 12 and turn 13.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if the long straights had anything to do with that symbol, but either way, it's got two really long straights. In fact, between turn 13 and 14, it's one of the longest on the calendar. It's 1.2 kilometers, which yeah, that's going to throw up something different. But also the weather, I think that throws up something different. It's quite cool. At this time of the year there in China, I think it's maybe in the low 20s, which obviously is, you know, for us that would be like, oh, a really nice day. But over there, and you know, compared to the rest of the F1 calendar, that is actually quite cool. And we've seen, you know, spots of, you know, rain in the past there, like sort of damp circuit, and also because, as you said before, it isn't used often. And it hasn't been used on an F1 calendar since 2019. It hasn't been rubbered in at all. And there's no support events that we know of that are going on this weekend. So that's going to throw up an interesting dilemma. And obviously, they've only got one practice session because it's a sprint weekend and there's a new sprint format. So there's a lot to go into about this weekend.
Yeah, I mean, Amy, you were very open and candid with us before we started recording and just sort of admitted that you never actually watched the Chinese Grand Prix. So, I mean, let's just sort of, based off someone completely neutral on the aspect, just take a look at the circuit layout. Just what do you make of it? What can you expect from each of the cars going into this weekend?
I think just based off what I can see here, I think Ferrari and Red Bull are going to be the ones dominating. I think McLaren and Mercedes are going to struggle a little bit. It seems, you know, won't suit the car, the track. But this actually reminds me, I remember watching a TikTok of the drivers, and it was designing their most dangerous, most inventive. And Alex Albon actually did something that looks very similar to this with the turn 1. And then obviously a lot of the long straights. And it's actually one of the, he said this is actually almost a great track for, you know, excitement, but not good for the cars, and this actually resembles that. So I'm excited, and I'm definitely excited because it's going to be the first sprint. And especially that Saturday, it looks great with the new format. I mean, it's going to be exciting because you're going to have Quali, is it? And then
so sprint race and then the Quali.
And then sprint. Okay, so the sprint Quali is going to be on the Friday, and then you're going to have the sprint in the morning, and then actual Quali in the afternoon on a Saturday. That well, it's not going to be the afternoon for us, is it? But I
mean, do you both prefer that new format? Because obviously, ever since the sort of sprints were sort of introduced to F1, been a lot of talk sort of regarding, you know, are they good for the sport? Is it worthwhile having them there? Is the structure of the weekend a little bit all over the place now? Seb, do you prefer this sort of new, get the sprint race out of the way format first, and then do the race, or would you prefer something a bit more sort of mixed up and like we all sort of had last season?
I kind of liked what it was last season. I think obviously time will tell. You know, we don't know what it's like this year, but I think it will be interesting. The only thing I would say is about the Parc Fermé thing, which I was talking about before, where obviously Parc Fermé before was closed straight after FP1 going into qualifying last year. So there was a little bit more unknown about their setups going into the race. Whereas this year, obviously, we won't have that because after the sprint race and sprint qualifying, it will reopen again. So I feel like we're going to see a bit more predictable things happening. So, you know, Red Bull, there's less of a chance of Red Bull getting their setup wrong, for example, for the race. You know, if they get it wrong in the sprint race, they'll get it right for the actual race. So I think that adds a little less jeopardy, which might be a little bit disappointing. But at the same time, I guess, it could give the chance for teams that don't perform well, say, some of the lower midfield sides don't perform well in the sprint, they have an opportunity to bounce back and maybe perform really well in the race. So it's got its, swings and roundabouts sort of things.
I mean, you could turn that on its head completely. One of the arguments with the sprint format was like, it's still not enough for the lower teams to, try and catch up in terms of points to the top teams. Because, of course, for a while, points were only for the top 8. Are they still just for the top 8? I don't think so.
I think they are.
Are they? Well, yeah. So it's a case of, points only for the top 8. That sort of makes an even bigger gap between the sort of front runners and the midfield. And, of course, sort of those just below as well. But say, everyone gets it wrong on the Saturday and like a random sort of team towards the bottom of the midfield, say like a Stake, for example, or even Alpine, who are struggling at the moment, do really well on the Saturday. That gives them a chance, a sort of a rare opportunity, as it were, this season to score some points on the Saturday, and then maybe the Sunday is sort of, back to the usual sort of, normal order of the standings. So if we take another look at the layout of the circuit, like you were saying, Amy, there's some huge straights, particularly sort of turn 13 to 14. There is that enormous back straight, which is a great overtaking opportunity, and that also could mean that Mercedes-powered cars are going to struggle this weekend, simply because the DRS zone starts so early on both of the main straights, and it's a case of that Mercedes car has been pretty slow in a straight line. That engine has been a pretty poor package for the works team and the customer teams as well, and McLaren have been able to sort of fall back onto their speed in the high speed corners with their aero package, but as the corners go, they're not too. Turn 7 is the only sort of high speed corner that comes to mind, really, and even that is still quite a battle on the tyres, and so yeah, there's not really too many areas which any of the Mercedes cars will excel in this weekend, and this also could mean that Ferrari come into play quite nicely. This is a very demanding track on the tyres, and of course there is a huge lack of data considering we've not raced there since 2019. There's no support events like you said earlier, Seb, and of course the track is also barely used, so it's going to be pretty cold, and that's going to wear the tyres down quite nicely. And so once the playing field is leveled out a little bit, I think Ferrari could be in for a decent weekend. But moving away from performance, because no one's really bringing any upgrade packages into this weekend, sort of not ideal when we want to talk about a race weekend. So F1 was pretty different last time we raced at Shanghai in comparison to now. So it's going to be pretty difficult to predict this race weekend and how it will go. But for those of you new around here, we are taking our season predictions very, very seriously. We've got a leaderboard where Amy and I are sort of battling out at the top, and Seb is sort of trailing behind a little bit, doing an Alpine in true Pierre Gasly style this season. But yes, we've got set categories for each race weekend, and we sort of make one prediction or 3 predictions because of the podium, and we get 1 point for every single correct prediction. So of course this is the first sprint race weekend of the year, so we need to introduce some new categories to our predictions. So we've got sprint race winner, sprint race pole, and of course the sprint race podium. So we'll start off with the sprint race pole position. Has anyone got anything different to their actual pole position sitter? Because I can see here we've all put Max Verstappen, spoiler alert, for the Saturday qualifying session. But has anyone got any sort of different shouts for pole?
I'm going to go Charles Leclerc.
Of course you are.
At least one person's going to
yeah, a bit of difference at least.
And also, I do think they'll be fast around this track, and Max getting actual pole for the race, I think, it might actually take them time to get set up right, and then they'll find from obviously sprint quali that they're not doing it right, and he'll go and get it by 3/10 of a second. So I reckon that'll be the case, and I think I could see Charles actually putting in a great lap initially, or Sainz, but it is really a case like I don't know who to go for these days with Ferrari, but I'm going to go Leclerc.
Do you know what? You've made me swing my decision actually.
Okay.
I was going to go for Max, but I do like the idea that because there's so little running being done, it will be a little bit of driver sort of, driver ability. So I'm going to go for Carlos Sainz then, actually.
Oh, okay.
I'm going to go against Charles Leclerc. I'm going to say that he's going to continue his great starts of the season and going to get the sprint pole.
Well, I mean, interesting you say that, because I'm also starting to get a little bit swayed. Red Bull have been a little bit lackluster in sort of setting up their cars at race weekends this year. Just more complaints than usual from Max. I mean, you look at Australia, they set up the car poorly, which led to a retirement. And of course, it's been quite difficult for Red Bull to sort of really get it right until the Sunday. This is a perfect opportunity for Ferrari to try and close the gap in the Constructors' Championship. Whether that means anything in the long term, we'll just have to wait and see. Do I say Carlos Sainz? Because I've got a feeling that Seb, that prediction could come true. No, I'm going to stick to my guts. I'm going to say Max Verstappen. I think it's just a track that suits Red Bull far too well. The setup doesn't have to be perfect straight away. And of course, the data is so unknown. I think that Red Bull car is just so much better than everyone else's. I think that playing field is still not quite as balanced as sort of as it could be, as it were. So yeah, I think I'm going to say say Max for the sprint race pole. What about our sprint race podium then, which includes the race winner? So the 1, 2, 3, 1 point for each correct podium position. Amy, we'll start with you.
I think I'll go Max, Charles, Perez.
Okay.
I'm going to go for Max, Carlos, Perez.
Okay.
I'm going to mirror your 7, say Max, Carlos, Perez as well. Well, actually, no, mirroring it would be the other way round, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
But I'll copy yours
You
and
know
say,
what I mean,
yeah. I'll say Max, Carlos, Perez as well. So then we'll move on to the Saturday qualifying, something a little bit more familiar. We'll start off with pole position, of course. Amy, who have you said for pole position?
I've gone Max Verstappen for
Yeah.
once.
Wow.
Yeah.
I did just say it about 5 minutes
Yeah.
ago as well, but yeah, we've all said Max Verstappen for that. I mean,
Yeah.
by then they should have the setup right once Parc Fermé's reopened. And
Yeah, 'cause I think that's the big thing because they've got 2 runs at it. There's no way they don't get it right on the second go. So
Yeah.
I think Max Verstappen,
Yeah.
of course, I think that's a shoe-in for pole position on the Saturday.
yeah, I mean, it makes total sense by that point, of course, given the caliber of driver Max is. Pretty decent pace round China usually as well. And yeah, like I said before, it's just a track that suits that Red Bull down to the ground, especially in comparison to the rest of the teams on the grid that could just have issues in general as well. At this point of the season, this is where the sort of gremlins start to kick in. We've had, 4 races now. Some technical things could start to, give teams some hiccups and some headaches to think about. We'll move on to the start of qualifying then. So just because Max Verstappen will inevitably get pole position doesn't necessarily mean he'll be the star of qualifying. It could be someone that does a really good job in the midfield and outperforms their car completely. So Amy, who have you gone with to be your star of qualifying?
I've gone with Carlos Sainz because he's just had a great season. I think that's why I've gone for him more so in the race qualifying, is that I don't think he takes to a track as well as Charles. But I mean, the season's proven that statement wrong. But I just think he's going to come in. He's going to be behind Max, and I think he could do better than his teammate, which is going to contradict my other later things. But I do think he's going to do better because he has been doing better. So yeah, he's just going to continue that trend, I guess.
Seb, what about yourself?
I've gone for the opposite Ferrari. So basically, opposite to our sprint predictions. I've gone for Charles Leclerc. I think that I think it will be a little bit that once it comes to Saturday, again with the Parc Fermé, things like that, I think Charles is going to get it right. Not enough for pole, but I do think a P2, I think, for Charles. I think that obviously that 1 lap pace, we know he's got it in the bag. So I've gone for a safer prediction than I usually go for in the start of qualifying. And this is just going to be, it's going to turn out he's going to do terrible, but I'm going to go for him.
I've said Yuki Tsunoda to be my star of qualifying. I think it could be a case of, with all the Mercedes cars, not being too strong in a straight line, that RB hasn't looked too shabby. You look back to Saudi Arabia, it took Ollie Behrman a while to make that move past Tsunoda. Then when he did, obviously, it was an amazing move. But the pace that RB had down the pit straight, and of course, Yuki Tsunoda has just been really impressive this season. Super consistent, super great at finding the limit of his car. And, Daniel got close to out-qualifying him in Japan, of course. He didn't make it into Q3. It was Tsunoda that knocked him out. But the margins were pretty fine, and I think that is the sort of the kick up the backside that Yuki needs, basically, to sort of find that next level and hopefully impress Red Bull enough to give him that seat in 2025. And of course, this is a track that Tsunoda hasn't really had much experience around. There is a chance that he's never driven around this circuit before, which could go either way. It could mean that he does an even better job, and it's a case of oh wow, with no experience, he is the star of qualifying, or it could be the perhaps more realistic way, and he's never driven around the track before, so chances are it could be a worse qualifying result. But no, I'm going to go with Tsunoda. I think I do back his form. Now let's sort of turn our attentions to something a little bit more negative. Let's talk about our flops of qualifying. I think there are a few candidates for this one, given how unpredictable the sort of the order will be going into this weekend. No data, no sort of prior knowledge of a lot of drivers on this circuit. Amy, who have you gone with to be your flop of qualifying?
I mean, we were talking about how bad Mercedes cars are going to do, and I think this driver's just really got his head down at the minute. The confidence is low, and the team morale is actually non-existent. So I've gone with Lewis Hamilton, and I genuinely can't see him getting into Q3, which should be a shock for a Mercedes. But I think doing well in Q2 could be a good weekend for them. So yeah, I've gone with Lewis Hamilton. I think that's just because of his expectations as a driver are so high. He's not going to match them, especially in this race. But I don't think this whole of this season, to be fair.
I was thinking about going for Hamilton actually, but because there's only one practice session, he's got less time to put his own setup on the car. So maybe with less time to put his own setup on the car, he actually will do all right. So I swayed away from Hamilton to go for Guan Yu Zhou.
Ooh.
Now, the homeboy hero. I just think in qualifying, I just think that the Saubers or Stake, whatever, have been really poor. I think especially in the qualifying.
Joe especially as well. I read a stat somewhere. I think the last 6 races Bottas has out-qualified him.
He's not taken to the car that well, and I think that's just going to continue. I can't see any reason why it wouldn't be. And I think I've gone for him over Bottas just because obviously the season so far he hasn't performed very well, but also there's so much hype around him this weekend. It's his first. I think he's the first Chinese driver to have a home Grand Prix. I think he's the first Chinese driver anyway. But still, it's all been waiting for this. 2022, it should have happened. 2023, it should have happened. Now it's finally happened, and I think it's just not going to deliver on the Saturday. So gone for Guan Yu Zhou.
Yeah, he's certainly going to need that home support from the Chinese fans out in their thousands supporting him, because that Stake has looked pretty poor this season. He has also looked pretty poor this season. But that's not to say that Bottas has been doing sort of particularly mediocrely. He's been all right. Bottas. Sort of going under the radar a little bit, given how crap that Stake is, basically. But yeah, it's an interesting one. Guan Yu Zhou, hopefully he isn't the flop of the weekend, because it would be nice to see him do well in that home race that he has deserved for the last few years that's been sort of stripped away from him. But I've gone with a little bit different. I mean, sort of going along Amy's line, Mercedes powered car. I've said Oscar Piastri to be the flop of qualifying. No experience around the circuit. That McLaren, this could be one of the worst race weekends they have all season. I'm going to say this now, look like a right tit when they go and get like a double podium or something like that. But I think Piastri, I don't know, Norris has experience around the track, sort of contradicting what I was saying about Tsunoda before. But, I think it's just a case of it won't be terrible from Piastri, but a Q2 exit it wouldn't surprise me, basically, is what I'm trying to say here. So let's move on to the podium now, away from qualifying. Looking pretty similar to what we said for the sprint, to be fair. Amy, I'll let you go first with your podium on the Sunday.
Yeah, I've actually gone swap Perez and Leclerc around. I've gone Max, Perez, Leclerc. I think that I say Sainz is going to have a better qualifying than Charles, but I just think it has to be Charles's weekend for once. Carlos has had a lot of the team orders go his way, which is weird after he's the driver actually going. But I think finally Charles will have everything go his way, have better speed, and potentially team orders could tell Carlos that they want Leclerc to go past, and he'll go and grab third place quite comfortably, I hope. I have no, it's just vibes alone to this weekend. But I think Leclerc's just, even though Sainz going to have better qualifying, Leclerc's going to have a better race. And Max and Perez is just inevitable. I mean, I'm sure you'll go into that in a second. But it's inevitable that Red Bull's going to be 1-2.
Yeah, I've gone for Red Bull 1-2 as well. I've gone for Max over Perez, of course. I think that I've made the mistake earlier in the season of not picking Perez as P2. In race trim, he's shown he's definitely, second quickest on the grid at the moment. I don't know whether that's drivability or the car. Probably the car, but still, the Red Bulls, they look inevitable. And then third place, I've gone for Charles Leclerc as well. Obviously, I predicted him star qualifying. I think being star qualifying, qualifying such high up, I think he will get team orders as well. That seems to be the way they've done it this season, not actually based on how quick they are in the race. It seems to be a bit of the qualifying. Whoever's starting higher up gets the better strategy, and I think that'll carry on. I think he'll come home to get a decent podium, yeah.
No, interesting that you say that about Checo, because we've all sort of written him off a little bit this season, given how, I think poor, you can say poor about how last season it was for Sergio Perez. But no, like you say, Seb, in race trim, he's been really impressive. And of course, this track will be quite demanding on the tyres. Perez is a bit of a tyre god in that respect, and I think that should fall nicely into the Sunday for him. So much so that I am also predicting him to finish P2, just behind his team. I say just behind his teammate. Who knows what the gap will be behind his teammate Max Verstappen to finish in first. And I said Carlos Sainz. I've gone with the other Ferrari driver, maybe sort of playing strategically here, just because of the sake of our prediction leaderboard. I want to say something a little bit different to spice it up a little bit, but I do genuinely believe that Carlos Sainz could finish in third place. He's got way more experience around the track than Charles Leclerc does, and he's also just a driver also in really, really good form. And it's it's quite hard to write him off this year, considering he's just been completely, not unexpectedly doing well, but because obviously you look at the back end of last year and he was on fire, but no one was expecting this level of pace from Carlos Sainz, especially considering that the team have shunned him out at the end of the season. So I'm going to go with Carlos Sainz, just because I think as well he's another driver that's really good with tyre management, really good with strategy, and I just think it'll be a race that falls quite nicely into his favour. Charles might even be quicker, but it could be a case of strategy and whatever happens, other circumstances. I've just got a gut feeling that Carlos Sainz will do well this weekend. Again, he might maybe look like an absolute mug, but we'll just have to wait and see on that one. Now, we've said Max to win, but that doesn't necessarily mean driver of the day. Who is your driver of the day prediction for Sunday, Amy?
Well, I've continued a bit of a trend. It's been a Ferrari driver every single race so far this season. Ollie Berman was obviously in Jeddah. I think it was Sainz in Bahrain, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And then obviously Sainz in Australia getting this win, and then it was Leclerc last week. So I'm going to go with Charles Leclerc. I think if he does have somehow if my predictions go correct and he has a worse qualifying than his teammate and is able to get past him in the race and get a podium, people don't tend to vote for Max Perez up there, so I'd go for Charles Leclerc. It'd only be, I think, someone else if it was someone behind in the points and has managed to build the way up, I guess a midfield car. But I'm going Charles Leclerc this weekend. I think he's going to be the better out the two.
I've gone for a little bit of a curveball one. I've gone for Guan Yu Zhou, even though I predicted him to be flop of qualifying. I think that actually will lead into him being driver of the day. If he can, make up 3 or 4 places, even from people, DNFing, I think that it will be enough for just, the vote. That's what I'm going for, the vote. Mm-hmm. I think people, maybe out of sympathy, give him a, he needs to take home something from his first home Grand Prix. So, I think they might vote for Zhou. Will he actually be driver of the day? Probably not, but I'm going to go for him, just see what happens.
Yeah, in terms of live supporters, drivers are sort of quite appreciative and quite vocal whenever it is like a home race or a significant race to them. Say they've got a lot of fans coming. Lewis made it very clear that Silverstone it takes him to that next level. And maybe Guan Yu Zhou will have that same effect at Shanghai. We'll have to wait and see on that one. But look, Bahrain is a pretty similar circuit to Shanghai, maybe sort of less on the extreme side of things, but Zhou did really well in the race at Bahrain, just missing out on the points, finishing P11. That was his sort of only highlight of the season so far, really. And some good fortune has to come his way at some point. But look, I don't know. I get what you mean with the vote. That does make perfect sense tactically in our sort of prediction battle. But I've said Carlos Sainz to be driver of the day, just to sort of, go hand in hand with my podium prediction. It'll just be a solid drive from him. And like you say, with Sergio Perez, no one votes for him if he's already at the top. Say if it's one of them P12 to P5 drives and he wins drive of the day, because he made up 7 positions. I think it'll just be a solid P2 to P2 finish for Perez, which is by no means a drive of the day performance, unless you're in like a Williams or something like that. But I think it'll just be a solid drive from Carlos Sainz that will warrant a drive of the day score for him. A bit of a boring one. I'm so sorry. It's hard to predict this race weekend because I've got absolutely no idea, so I'm just going to play it safe and say Carlos Sainz. But let's move on to the flop of the race now. So we've had our flop of qualifying. Who is your flop of the race, Amy?
On the trend of Mercedes cars, I'm going with Aston Martin. Yeah.
Okay.
And that is because there's a lot of talk around Aston Martin at the minute. Alonso's signed until at least 2026.
Yeah, we'll talk more on that in a different video.
And I think there's a lot of eyes looking at that team at the minute. I guess if there's going to be both of them there next season. And I think Stroll could crash. I wouldn't know. A lot of people DNF around Shanghai?
There's incidents. Because the type of the corners, turn 1, you can see some turn 1, turn 2 incidents. It gets
quite tight. Corners get quite tight, quite unexpectedly. But it's a purpose-built circuit, which means that walls are quite far away.
Yeah.
So,
Depends if anyone's a torpedo as well, I guess.
Yeah,
right.
Nice reference. But yeah.
I just think it'll be a DNF. I think, I just don't think he'll finish the race, and I think that'll be a collision or a crash, or I think, he lets the pressure get to him. He's that sort of driver, and there is eyes there at the minute. So, and also the car isn't going to be the best on track. So, I'm going with Lance Stroll. I think it's a bit of a cop-out, but just Stroll's points, maybe.
I've gone for a McLaren. I've gone for Oscar Piastri. So sort of keeping in line with the Mercedes power unit thing, but more so to do with how McLaren have performed in the low-speed corners. They've been absolutely shocking. As you'll see with my shot prediction in a second, I just don't think they're having a good weekend. And I think Piastri in the race, obviously he's never been there before. Norris has.
Yeah.
So he's got that. I know it's not a lot of experience, but it's still a little bit. It's still something.
Norris's race was over pretty quickly in 2019. His only Shanghai Grand Prix in an F1 car.
But it's still, he's had the whole race weekend sort of thing. So he's had all the practice sessions. Piastri's only having one, going straight into a sprint and then also going straight into the race. I just can't see it. I do think a DNF's on the cards, but even without a DNF, I do think their performance just is, on the whole, is not going to be good enough. So I've gone for Oscar Piastri.
Unfortunately, I've gone with Guan Yu Zhou to be my flop of the race, a man that we've talked about a lot this episode so far. But it's a bit of a shame. I don't really want to say it, considering how much I've been trying to support him this season. I mean, knowing my track record, I've said like, oh yeah, Zhou to finish in the points, Zhou to get into Q3, and he's done the exact opposite. Now I've said he's going to be the flop of the race. He'll go and finish on the podium. Just wait and see. But I think, there's a lot of hype going into him this weekend. Naturally it is his home race, his first ever home race. He's going to have lots of support from the Chinese fans, but for reasons that might not even necessarily be his fault, like how, we don't know how good that stake kick Sauber car is going to be, really. So, I think it'll be just underwhelming for him. It won't be the home race that he's wanted all this time. And flop of the race, Guan Yu Zhou. I think Bottas will outperform him as well. I think this is where experience could come into play, particularly given, Zhou's poor form at the moment. Let's move away from the drivers now and talk about our best teams of the weekend. Amy, we'll start with you.
Boring again, but I'm going safe. It's definitely a team that's been trustworthy for me the last few weeks, and I've definitely got points from, and it's Ferrari. They've been the second best team on the grid. I could go Red Bull and obviously get points there, but
we'll disqualify if you do that.
But I am going Ferrari again, and that is just because I think they'll have a great quali. I think they'll have a great race, and if they somehow be the only other team that's on the podium, then why not? I guess they are the team of the week.
Well, I've actually changed what I'm going to go for. I was going to go for Sauber. I'm actually going to change it to go for Haas.
Ooh.
Okay.
I think they're going to have a really good weekend, actually, thinking about the fact they've obviously got Ferrari power unit, and they've had a really solid, start to the season. They've consistently been best of the rest, and I think that maybe they could be competing with McLaren. Ooh. I think they're going to pick up some points this weekend again. I think strategy's been somehow it's been on it every week. The strategy at Haas, which is surely it's going to go wrong at some point, but whilst they're still in this good good grain of form, I'm going to go for Haas. So yeah, I think that's a bit of a safe one, actually.
No, I like that prediction a lot. I mean, Haas have really been impressive this year, especially considering how sort of boring that car looked, and sort of how, the lack of design innovation that we sort of seem to see when they unveiled their livery. But of course, that might have just been like a show car. But, but even still, you look at that Haas car, it doesn't scream fast. It doesn't scream best of the rest. But you know what? They've proven us all wrong, and they've really, they've had a great start to the season. And I do like that as well, because strategy has been something that Haas have got right for the first time ever this season, basically. And of course, with the tyre degradation that's inevitably going to incur around this circuit, strategy is going to be a huge part as to how that race unfolds on the Sunday. So Haas, I think I do like that a lot. I've said RB, though. I think that midfield battle will be really tight. It'll be really entertaining as well, especially how many, overtaking opportunities there are around the circuit. I just think RB as well, if you look back to Saudi Arabia, their straight line speed, I sort of mentioned it with Tsunoda before, it's that Honda engine hasn't looked too shabby in a straight line either. And that RB, in the right hands at the right circuit could deliver a decent result. I think Yuki Tsunoda could score some pretty solid points. And of course, Daniel Ricciardo looked pretty quick in Japan, certainly in the qualifying session anyway. And so maybe some points for Ricciardo as well, but I wouldn't put money on that, to be fair. But I think this could be a decent weekend for RB to pick up some points, especially when the Mercedes power units, as we've mentioned for the millionth time this episode, might not be up to scratch. So yeah, I said RB to be the best team. Finally now, and last but not least, is our shock predictions. Now, I don't think any of us have got a single one right yet. I might be wrong. Yeah, no, both nodding, both shaking their heads. But so our shock predictions, bit of a wild card one, basically. If you're new around here, our shock prediction, we can get more than 1 point on it, depending on how shocking, as it were, they are, if they do come true. So, Amy, for example, what is your shock prediction for the weekend?
So this actually correlates with none of my predictions that I have predicted, but I just like that. I just like the little extra option. But yeah, we've just slagged off all the Mercedes car this whole episode. So I'm going to say a McLaren podium weekend. I don't know if it's going to be in the sprint.
Okay.
I don't know if it's going to be in the race.
Oh, so you're including the sprint as well.
If that's okay.
That's absolutely fine.
Acceptable.
That's absolutely fine.
Because I think, we've just really not talked well about them at all. And any other week, I wouldn't ever put that in a shock prediction, especially this season. They're always going to be up there. But, the way, I don't know how they actually are going to be around Shanghai. And you know what? I would absolutely hate it where we've come into this episode and actually gone, they're going to be awful. And they're actually getting P2, P3. So I'm just going to go McLaren podium weekend. So either the quali or the race. No, not quali, sprint or the race. So, yeah.
Playing for points, I see. I mean, I like the strategy. To be fair, who knows, especially with that sprint. A sprint podium could be on the cards depending on how well everyone sort of acclimatizes to that track. FP1 is going to be hugely important for teams. This could be a practice session worth watching. You never know. But yeah, Seb, what's your shot prediction?
I've also gone for McLarens, but this time I'm going to go for both McLarens out before Q3 or SQ3. I'm going to add that in there as well.
Yeah.
So they're either going to get knocked out in Q2 or both in SQ2 or obviously Q1 as well. Yeah, it's the low speed corners. They're just not good at them. So I think that they're going to have a really tough time this weekend. So I don't think it would be a huge surprise, as you were saying. You wouldn't be surprised if, say a McLaren was knocked out in Q2. But I think if both are, I think that would be quite shocking. So I've gone for that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a valid one. I've also gone with the Mercedes power unit based prediction. And you know what? I will slightly alter it as well. I've got written down here, Alonso out in Q2. That also stretches to SQ2, given how you two are sort of playing this out. Again, it won't necessarily be Fernando Alonso's fault. That Aston Martin, ever since they've rebranded, has looked really, really heavy. I don't know how to describe it, but yeah, the straight line speed hasn't been the best. Low speed corners, really, really strong. Obviously, you look back to Fernando Alonso's performance at Monaco, for example, last year. Really, really impressive in that regard, and sort of but this is not this is the straights are the main part of the circuit here. That's where, especially in the race and even over one lap, that the drivers will make up or lose the most time, and this isn't to say Lance Stroll will out qualify him. I don't think that will be the case. I think it'll just be an underwhelming weekend for Aston Martin in general, but we mustn't write all of them off, because this will be based on our predictions, we're anticipating a total shake-up
half the
here.
grid just being terrible, basically.
Yeah, exactly. So who knows who's going to pick up those final few positions in Q3. But I think it could just be a case of, as well, the setup isn't quite right. Although Fernando Alonso is the most experienced F1 driver of all time, so maybe that's just a terrible prediction. But yeah, I think for the sake of points, I'm going to say Fernando Alonso out in Q2. But that also could mean that Lance Stroll is out in Q1. But he's in good form as well, to be fair. So maybe I'm being a little bit too harsh on him there. But as it stands, we'll just take a quick look at the points and then round out the episode there. So at the top of the table is myself on 19 points. Amy is just breathing down my neck with 18, and then Seb, unfortunately, is on 10. But you know what? With some of those predictions, you could claw it back a little bit this weekend.
We said that last week.
We said that last week.
3 points.
Yeah, but
you know what? I was going to go Leclerc, star of Quali, because you did. I thought, no.
There we go.
It'll be wrong.
That's good.
It'll be wrong.
Oh, yeah.
That's brutal. That's brutal.
I thought you were praising me there.
No. I thought, you know what? I was going to, Leclerc back him, and then I was like, nah, Seb's gone for it. I'll avoid that.
Make sure to tune in around this time next week to see if we've got any of our predictions correct. I mean, we'll have to, I'm not too confident in mine, in fairness. I must say, I am sort of hiding behind a smile a little bit here. But we will do a reaction to our predictions and a reaction to the race in general next week, as we do with every single race weekend. But yeah, that is about it for our Chinese Grand Prix preview and prediction. If you like what you see, then make sure to click subscribe or follow us on Spotify. Leave a like on any platform. We're available on all listening platforms if you're not too fond of watching our content. And of course, if you are listening to us, we're of course available on YouTube as well. YouTube, we're putting out more content as well. We've got some sort of video essay type videos that you can check out on the channel, with definitely loads more to come as well. Seb has been an absolute machine in the last few weeks and has a few in the tank, and Amy and I will pull our weight in due course as well. But yeah, like I said before, that's about it. Make sure to like, subscribe, follow us on TikTok and Instagram as well. And thank you so much for tuning in. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.